There's a commie over on Odysee right now in the comments saying private property is not voluntary. I said, be gone, commie. This channel is for anarchists.
From Dallas, Texas, this is Anarchast.
Greetings, institutions. Welcome back to Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I will be Patrick Smith. Today's guest is the managing editor at the Libertarian Institute, host of the Don't Tread on Anyone podcast, and author of the new book, The Voluntaryist Handbook. He's one of the people that doesn't just talk, he does. He creates, he puts it out there, and he fights, and it's really good. Welcome to the show, Keith Knight. How are you?
I'm doing so well, especially now that you got all three correct. My title, my podcast, and the book title. I think we should just end it right there. I mean, finally, someone gets all three.
You know what? There's links in the description straight to the book. So we're kind of done here. Mission accomplished. just pause the stream. Just click the link, buy the book. Done. There.
You don't even have to buy the book. The commie in the chat will be happy to know that I give the PDF away free, both on Odysee.com and archive.org. So, wait, hold on. Actually, never mind. Because if he reads it, then he would be exploiting my surplus labor by benefiting from my work without compensating me. Never mind, sir. Don't click on the link. It's really bad.
Son of a bitch. Those commies just can't win, can they? Okay, so, man, you have done the thing that I still have not been able to do, and it's becoming more frustrating the older I get, is write a book. And I know that this is not like hard authoring a book from scratch. You're compiling a bunch of ideas to form a thesis, which is still quite a feat. It's not an easy thing to do that anybody can just come along and do. So I want to, let me intro the book first. So, his description is, there exists two blatant contradictions, which roughly 99% of intellectuals, journalists, and voters erroneously believe. We must have a monopoly to prevent monopolies, and literally no one has the right to steal, enslave, or murder. Literally no one. Not a single one of you in the world has the right to steal, enslave, or murder, except the government has the right to steal, enslave, and murder. So tell us about the book. How did you have the idea to put this thing together? And how did it go?
One of the things that I ask a lot of people on my show is, if you rattle off like 10 books people should read, they'll say that is too high of a time price and they won't do any. But if you say, look, here's one book that you should read, a lot of people will take that seriously and read that book. So I was always having difficulty answering this same thing myself. I was saying, well, I'd like them to read Bastiat's The Law, or Economics in One Lesson, or The Most Dangerous Superstition. And I go, you know what? Why don't I just put all of those quotes into one book, along with some articles and essays that took me from being a progressive and brought me to libertarianism. And then I will actually have one book that I could hand people and say, look, I would love for you to check out like a ton of podcasts and a ton of speeches and a ton of interviews, but time is of the essence in life. Every moment we spend doing one thing, we're not doing another. So if there's one book I would recommend to people to get a bird's eye view into our philosophy, it would be this book. And the thing that really motivated me was Michael Malice being very successful with the Anarchist Handbook. And as I'm reading this, I go, gosh, I wish he wouldn't have done this. I wish he would have done that. I wish he would have just made that caveat for all the listeners and all the people. And I go, well, how about instead of me criticizing someone who has done more for anarchy yesterday than I will ever do in my entire life, why don't I become the change I want to see in the world? And especially the Libertarian Institute was nice enough to not only publish it, but help me give away the PDF for free. That's where I got the idea, and that was my intention with putting these collection of 50 essays together.
You mean to tell me that instead of writing a 7-paragraph strongly worded YouTube comment at Michael Malice over his book and how he did it in a way you didn't like, that you actually just shut the fuck up and created something on your own?
I actually did. I wanted to be able to link people to something that I didn't have 50 caveats on. It's like, well, you should check out this book, but I will say he misses 1, 2, 3. No, just be the change you want to see in the world. So that is why I put these together. And what makes these 50 stand out is they come to the same conclusion with like 50 different starting points. Some will have just theoretical ideas. Other will have much more pragmatic ideas. For example, chapter 15 is titled How Private Governance Made the Modern World Possible by Edward Stringham. He goes, not just in theory should we not have the state monopolizing something like security, but there are these organizations that are constantly cooperating, not because they're so nice and they think of the greater good, but it's actually in their interest to cooperate, that we have the Mac that I'm talking to you on cooperate with the people who make the USB, cooperate with the people who make this Shure microphone, and they cooperate with Apple to make these headphones. That's just what's in front of me. It also operates with this printer, all these different companies working together so consumers can benefit. That is one of the many examples why we wouldn't assume that something like anarchy would be a war of all against all, where everyone is just in isolation doing their own thing. So whether you think people are so good that then we don't need a state, or if people are really bad and self-interested, well, then you certainly can't have something like a government where some people have the right to initiate violence against others. So the book has people from the right, such as Joe Sobran. He was, for 18 years, the senior editor at National Review with William Buckley, and he writes an article titled The Reluctant Anarchist, where he goes, look, guys, the idea of objective law, like we can't just have your opinions or something, we need a state with judges. Well, it turns out that the 9 Supreme Court judges, all Ivy League, all chosen by presidents, they don't agree on what the First Amendment says and how to interpret it. Not just any law in some state where it's thousands of pages long and there have been tons of different verdicts. The most basic thing, this freedom of speech, or the right to bear arms, or quartering soldiers, was one that many judges disagreed upon. So taking away the idea of objectivity, and with government, there's a guarantee that you get something in the free markets. You don't know if you'll get it or not. Governments are constantly providing, claiming to provide things and never coming through. Giving the state a monopoly on education doesn't make everyone educated. Government military doesn't always make you safe. Government police doesn't secure everyone's property. Matter of fact, it confiscates about 33% of everyone's property every year. That would be, I would fire this security organization if they did that to me. So it's about, 1, having basic standards for the state, and then 2, seeing that all these people, even people from the left, like Sheldon Richman, who works with me at the Libertarian Institute, all these people from different starting points came to the same conclusion, that in life, it is morally and economically superior to achieve your ends through voluntary exchange or mutually beneficial trades, rather than some people having a recognized right to initiate violence, whether they're called the gang group, or the Congress group, or a group called military. The same principles apply. That's what this book is about.
Beautiful. So you've had me on your podcast twice now, I think. The first time was to totally just give some commies a thrashing, which was, oh man, I mean, it was a pleasure, like any time. And the second time we got into some more philosophy. We rebutted, I can't even remember what it was now. Do you? It
was about how taxation and regulation aren't theft because you actually don't own anything. That's
right. You have an excellent podcast. You have a lot of great guests on with a lot of really good conversations. I would definitely suggest that everybody go check it out. It is called the Don't Tread on Anyone podcast. It's on Odysee and YouTube and other places, maybe. I don't know. Definitely check that one out. I would like to ask about the Libertarian Institute. Is this something you started or just got involved in? What's the story behind that?
Well, this was started by a gentleman named Scott Horton, a foreign policy expert. He wrote a book titled Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. He went on Tom Woods' show to promote this book, and I said, well, how heroic. Someone finally says, because by this time, questioning the Iraq war was a little boring and predictable. The fact that he went after what some people would put in the holy wars. Like, you might be able to question some Latin American interventions, but you can't question Afghanistan. I mean, 9/11 had just happened. What do you mean that the war in Afghanistan wasn't justified? Scott Horton did such a good job that I had asked him to come on my show, share his thesis, and go over some rebuttals to George Bush's book, specifically Decision Points. And then we really got along, and later I met him again on the Ernest Hancock show, Freedom's Phoenix. We got to talking a little, and he invited me to come work at the Libertarian Institute, which he started with William Norman Grigg and Sheldon Richman. What we want to do, is have a free libertarian educational archive. So you can go to libertarianinstitute.org and you can check out any of our books on foreign policy, economics, civil society, the Voluntarist Handbook. You can also use the search engine to type in anything you're interested in: history, the First World War, minimum wage, housing regulation, zoning. And with the search engine, you can find tons of articles, essays, podcasts, videos, very long essays, along with very short blogs. So we're trying to bring some variety and depth to people who, well, they have spent tens of thousands at university, and they still aren't able to just say, you know what, Biden really should go to jail for murdering 7 children in Afghanistan on August 29th, 2021. They can't do that. They've spent tens of thousands of dollars to not be able to do that. We want to give them both the courage and intellectual capacity to not have double standards for the state. That's what libertarianinstitute.org is all about.
And true to your word, you do publish a diverse set of opinions in the libertarian space, within reasonable boundaries. You published the Anti-Subjectivist Manifesto a while back. I'm forever grateful to you guys for that.
Happy to.
Okay. Back to the book. I noticed it towards the bottom of the description of the book. You said this, and it piqued my interest. It said, "The following collection of essays, excerpts, and quotes has given me the intellectual capacity to stop hating people based on arbitrary differences and to focus on what really matters." What did you mean by that? And what was your transition?
So initially, when I was into politics, I was supporting Barack Obama. I was too young to vote. But when I was getting into it, it seemed like we were always playing groups off against each other and then switching which group we were playing. So at first it was rich versus poor, then black versus white, then American versus Middle Easterners. This could be Iranians, Afghanis, Iraqis, Libyans, Syrians. Gaddafi's the new Hitler. Assad is the new Hitler. Then it was the North Koreans. And now it's back to Russia after it stopped being Russia in the early 90s.
Don't forget gas stoves. Gas stoves.
Gas stoves. That is an arbitrary difference. The poor gas stove didn't choose to not be electric. Be nice. The big ones today, you still see rich versus poor with democratic socialism, but men versus women is a big one that the media is constantly trying to push, along with black versus white, or even immigrant versus person who came out of their mother's womb on this geographical area. So instead of hating people based on accidents of birth or something totally arbitrary, yes, that person's wealthy in relation to me, and I'm wealthy with regard to someone in Sierra Leone. Why would that make me their enemy necessarily? And vilifying the rich, as I did as an Obama supporter, I was not differentiating between a person who acquired wealth voluntarily by creating something that other people wanted in exchange for money, and a thief, or someone who monopolized the money supply coercively through the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, and then just printing it themselves. There's no distinction when you're hating rich versus poor. If you're just hating blacks or Jews, the second someone's born, you've decided which team they're going to be on. None of their actions matter after that. So not hating people based on that is vitally important. Second thing, Thomas Sowell said, I've been explaining these basic concepts to people in economics for years, and they refuse to admit they're wrong. It really seems like it's not that people want an explanation that makes sense. What they want are heroes to cheer and villains to hate, and they don't want non-emotional responses that don't give them that. I said that is so important. So it's not that we can say, everything in the world is good, or you shouldn't just hate people, you should just be lovely. You can say, you know what, Mr. Conservative, Mr. Democrat, you actually can hate people. You are totally justified in hating some people. And here's a principle difference based on how you can, like some people and hate others. If you take it as, well, if someone breaks, there's lawbreakers and then law followers. Well, a great deal of atrocities have been done under the guise of legality. Not to mention, people often don't agree on what the law is. Two governments claim ownership over a certain area, whether it's Donbass or Taiwan or Arizona. And how do you determine that? One of the differences you can actually use to determine right behavior from wrong behavior is whether or not you're getting someone's consent and participating with them voluntarily, whether it's in your commercial life or whether it's in civil society or even family members. So if we look at the big crimes that people will generally agree are bad, things like murder, kidnapping, slavery, rape, what differentiates these from justified things that you might think are similar. So if you work very hard and are not compensated, progressives will often call that slavery, or if you're compensated for a very low amount. That necessarily means that every time you work on your own house, anytime you do volunteer work, every time an entrepreneur invests in themselves, they are enslaving themselves. Well, it's not things like hard work or low pay, or else college would be slavery because you don't get paid to go to college. It costs you 30 grand usually. So it's not those things that make slavery bad. It's the lack of consent. The reason that's important is because if you see someone like Vladimir Zelensky, who had February 24th initiated a "thou shalt not leave" edict in Ukraine and forced labor from all men ages 18 to 60, the progressive might look at that, if they were a little honest, and say, well, this is sexist because it applies to one group and not another group, so the problem is sexism. Again, the problem there is consent. Because if it's sexism, then we just need to force labor upon just as many women as we do men. And that doesn't get to the root of the issue when it comes to rape. What differentiates rape from lovemaking is consent, or going over to someone's house versus kidnapping them simply is an act of consent. Trade versus theft, another example of when consent comes into our life. So the major principle that we could operate on and truly divide good people from bad is this general principle. Now, what a lot of people might have just heard, well, not in this audience, but what people sometimes hear is, what I just said will solve all the world's problems. That is not what I'm advocating when I say the non-aggression principle. We're just talking about a general set of rules that we could have as a societal default or reference point, just as the opposition says, well, everyone has to accept the legitimacy of democracy or monarchy or government, or the police tell you to do something, you have to do it. Well, those are defaults, just like we're asking people to accept the non-aggression principle as a default. So with this book, I'm trying to change general public opinion by getting people to differentiate good versus bad based on a principle of voluntarism, not any of this nonsense where you have to hate a group before you support them. I mean, the biggest example would be Al-Qaeda is a terribly evil organization. You have to go to war with Al-Qaeda. And then the U.S., according to the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, he sent an email to Hillary Clinton saying, make sure Hillary knows that we're on Al-Qaeda's side in Syria, fighting against Assad. Same thing happened in Libya. They sided with LIFG, Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, against Muammar Gaddafi, and now they are Al-Qaeda's air force in Yemen against the Houthi government. So we've gone from Al-Qaeda's pure evil to actually we have to side with Al-Qaeda in other times. So this will help get people out of this, I hate, insert whatever arbitrary difference, and then later having to side with that group and just pick another enemy and vilify people unnecessarily. That's what I meant in the introduction.
Now, you have a lot more authors or excerpts from authors in this compilation than Michael Malice's book, which I also had some issues with. I actually tried to do like a read-through, talk-through on my Disenthrall channel where we went through it. And man, it just starts out with the commie stuff, and I just quickly just ran into the ground. I'm like, guys, I cannot continue. I don't know, we got like halfway through. It was really tough. Your book has a lot more authors, a lot more of a selection, better sampling, a lot more good stuff. Like this should be, should I say it? I'm going to say it. Fuck it. I am all out of fucks to give. this is probably the better version of the Anarchist Handbook, if I'm honest. Now, going back to what you said about hating people based on arbitrary differences, is there any particular article or excerpt or chapter in this book that speaks to that kind of cracked that in your mind? I know it's a terribly open-ended question that you're probably not prepared for, but
maybe excerpts from The Law by Frederick Bastiat. So one of the differences in mine and Malice's book is with the book. So I have No Treason by Lysander Spooner, The Law by Bastiat. I just have my favorite quotes from that book, because even asking someone to, hey, you should read these 75 pages. It's like, what percentage of people are going to commit to that? And I go, well, what if I just gave you my 15 favorite quotes in 2 or 3 pages? They might say, well, that is interesting, and it gives them a much easier reference point in the future. I'm not sure which one of these best describes that specific issue.
I'm surprised. I'm seeing a lot of stuff that I haven't even read, so maybe I can call out some of the ones I haven't read. Maybe you can fill me in on what they're about. One Moral Standard for All by Sheldon Richman. Have not read. What's up with that?
You know what? That's probably it. So Sheldon Richman says, look, there's a lot of reasons to be pessimistic. You might say, well, we're going to have to change people's mind on agriculture subsidies, and then minimum wage, and then zoning laws, and then state schooling, and then the war in Libya, and then the First World War. And but you know what? Let's just do this as a hobby and make friends out of libertarianism, because we're basically screwed. It's not that we disagree with people on a lot of things, Sheldon says. It's actually we disagree with people on one thing, and that is simply we have a double standard for a group in society. This is usually referred to as the state, especially today. Of course, throughout history, you can say, well, there are competing regimes, competing allegiances. Sometimes if, someone realizes their parent is a murderer, they won't turn them in or something. That could be a double standard. But generally speaking, talking about on a large scale, if any person did what the police do on a daily basis, you can actually watch them respond. There's a number of videos of people who will just walk up to someone and say, excuse me, you mind if I look through your car? And then the person, of course, freaks out. Even there's a channel called Cart Narcs, where a guy simply asks people to put their car back and puts on a small magnet, and they flip out and say, how dare you, I'm going to call the police. But the police can do so much worse, and people will say, well, that's what you have to do. If you don't like what they're doing, you can take it up with them, maybe in a court of law, but when they say something, you have to do it. Probably the best example of a moral double standard is a former congressman, Adam Kinzinger, who thinks it's so cool that a third world war is ramping up in Ukraine. We got to send them more money, and heck yeah, we got to go to war. I know it's going to kill people, but that's something we got to do. You can't just talk. You can't just be nice. We got to get serious and start killing people with machine guns and everything. Also, one of the worst things to ever happen was on January 6th, people walked inside the Capitol building without a permission slip. Well,
you mean terrorists attacked our country's sovereignty? Right. 2
seconds ago, you can't just talk things out, and you have to sometimes get serious and use coercion. But now, when it comes to walking inside the Capitol building, which, by the way, I've always been told that was our property, and people who believe in excluding people, that's the private sector excludes you from things. Government, it's all up for grabs. So technically, that was just a bunch of people walking into some land that they owned. And then all of a sudden they weren't allowed. So one moral standard for all is saying, look, for the same reason, if I started issuing taxes on people's income, people should have the right to say, I don't see value in that. I'm going to opt out. For the same reason, if I tried to violently dominate anyone's peaceful actions under the guise of colonizing them or regulating them, as today they would call it, we would see that as me simply claiming ownership over another human, in violation of not just the 13th Amendment, but the principle of being anti-slavery. So one moral standard for all says, look, it's not that we have to argue with them on 50,000 topics, almost all of which we disagree on. It's just this one thing where the same standards that we would have for anyone else, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not rape or enslave, we just take that principle and apply it consistently. So the ones I mentioned earlier for people on the right, thou shalt not murder, we just take that and we apply it to the state. and corporations and churches and men and old people and young people. No double standards for people based on anything arbitrary like that. And if you're on the left, you might say, well, I believe in equality. Well, if some people have the right to initiate violence against others and they have the right to rule others, that is about as unequal as any situation can get. And the greatest inequality, what Jeremy Locke called the ultimate enslavement, is murder, which governments engage in on a large scale. See, Patrick, you and I have to take the heat for every bad thing that has happened at the hands of a capitalist since 1776. Mm-hmm. But when governments go around and murder people, First World War, it was like 16 million. They can't even get to like rounding up to the closest million, the historians still agree on, because there's so much murder. But the statists can advocate that, and no problem at all. Their hands are totally clean. So there is an element of telling people, hey, when you support giving a ton of people all this power, what did you think was going to happen? A lot of democratic socialists will say this as we need to have a wealth tax. The government last year took in $6.27 trillion. I'm sorry, that's what they spent, according to the Congressional Budget Office. $6.27 trillion. Are you really happy with that? That's the group that needs more money in society. So even if you believe in things like justice and equality, advocating for the state to have more power or this moral double standard in the first place is not something you should do. That is what Sheldon Richman means by one moral standard for all. That's an excerpt from his book, What Social Animals Owe to Each Other. He is a left libertarian who has tons of great things to contribute there.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let me find some a few more good ones here for us to hit on. You've got all the big names, a lot of good stuff. Murray Rothbard, you lead out with Stefan Kinsella, Stefan Molyneux. Which one did you get from Stefan Molyneux? Let's see. 6 questions for statists. I bet you haven't read that one. I have not read 6 questions for statists. Yeah. What's that one? Tell us about that one.
So Molyneux says, look, so let's, but before we get into the specifics, what would this look like in an anarchist society? What would that look like? Don't you know that this person was an anarchist and they did a bad thing? Before getting into those specifics, let's just have 6 questions we ask. And he says these 6 questions are the shortest, briefest way to let people know anarchism isn't some wild pie-in-the-sky dream. Question number 1. Does government actually solve the problem in question? People often say governments solve the problem of injustice. However, these courts can take many years to render a verdict and cost the plaintiff and defendant hundreds of thousands of dollars or more. Do state armies actually defend citizens? Do state police actually protect private property? Do state welfare actually solve the problem of poverty? Does the war on drugs? Yada, yada, yada. He goes on. So, one of the things we're constantly told is, well, I believe in healthcare for all, and you guys oppose that. As if we don't want people to have access to healthcare. What they are actually saying is they want the state to coercively fund and monopolize it. So calling it universal does not mean that everyone's going to get it just because the state has monopolized it. In many instances, there will be an ultra shortage because the state doesn't have an incentive to increase supply or improve quality. Second question, can the criticism of the anarchic solution be equally applied to the statist solution? So if the anarchist says, well, the good thing is under a voluntary society, you could have people compete to provide the best books, the best drinks, the best mouses, the best furniture, whatever. And the government advocate can come back with, well, don't you know competition is this dog-eat-dog thing and it's terrible? So they'll take something like competition and pin the negative on us. When in reality, have you heard of democratic voting or democratic republics? You think people compete? Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are so much alike. Yet, on the debate stage, she says, Bernie Sanders is a sexist. He said I couldn't win because I'm a woman. Did you lie about me on national TV? Even people who are closest in ideology are still going at each other's throats. Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, it got so ugly for, like the tiniest bit of things. It was never, well, I thought murder was wrong and he thought it was right. It was always something small. Yet, it was a highly competitive environment. George Santos, my new favorite congressman, not a joke, is the biggest liar probably ever. and he was doing all these immoral things and lying because he was being ultra competitive. So that is one of the many examples of this. Criticism does apply to the free market. However, it applies many times over to the state. Question number 3 goes, is anarchy accepted as a core value in non-political spheres? So if it's okay to initiate aggression against peaceful people for the purpose of ushering in equality or something, well, shouldn't we have that in the dating market or the friendship market? Some people have the right to coerce friendships and others don't. Why? What's the downside? What's wrong with people having friends? Once you apply this principle outside of the political realm or to other groups, you could see it's nothing anyone would passionately defend, or seldom would. Question 4, would the person advocating statism perform state functions himself? So if something's really justified, then you should have no problem doing, theoretically, maybe you're too weak or you don't have the courage, whatever. If something is really morally justified, well, then surely that would extend to you, the person who gives the government their rights in the first place, according to democracy. So if I said, well, if you say rape and murder is wrong, would you have the right to stop a rapist and a murderer? And people say, abso-freaking-lutely, I have the right to do so. I don't, because there's, people who are specialized in this. But yeah, I have the right to do so. And then you say, do you have the right to force people to fund the Catholic Church if they want to opt out? And in exchange, they'll provide free universal 12-year education. Do you have the right to put someone in a cage and shoot them if they resist, if they don't chip in for something like this? And they'll say, well, the thing is, we live in a society, and then you get the speech. So we could see a second ago, they know they have the right to use force against aggressors, but peaceful people, well, then they give you this long-winded speech. 2 more. Molyneux says, can something be both voluntary and coercive at the same time? This is in reference to the line consent of the governed. Mm-hmm. So if something, they say, well, democracy is legit. It's not like some monarchy, some king forcing something on you. We are ruled by the consent of the governed. So if it's by your consent, then anyone can have the right to opt out, just as you might consent into an employment contract, but then later say, I'm not liking this, I'm leaving. To which the person will say, no, we would have to coerce you. And the reason it's justified coercion is because it's voluntary based on your consent of the governed. This is a total contradiction that Molyneux does a great job pointing out.
They're mutually exclusive. Consent and governed is 2 mutually exclusive. If you consent, then you're just obeying your contractual agreed upon relationships, and you're not being governed. If you're being governed, you don't have the capacity to consent because you're being governed. You're being controlled. These are, sorry. One more.
Of course, Molyneux's final one said, does political organization change human nature? So if you say, people are really good, well, then you don't necessarily need a state. Well, it's actually, people aren't good, people are bad, and that's why we need a state. What species would be occupying the state? Are we getting ruled by owls
Lizard
or dragons? Maybe that's the caveat. Maybe it's all legitimate after all because they're not
Checkmate.
humans, and human nature is bad. So they'll say things like, "Well, I just believe that there's some really bad people out there." Ushering in an organization where some people have the right to coerce others doesn't solve the problem of there being bad people. To the contrary, it attracts the worst kinds of people and allows them to enact their values, or whatever you want to call them, on the rest of us. So those are the 6 basic questions that you could have. They're not too triggering. So it doesn't say, how about when Donald Trump did X, Y, and Z? Well, people already have an opinion about him, and that would get you off into something for a long time, wouldn't be productive. He says, here are 6 of the most productive starting points when having a conversation about statism
What was that
and
meme?
Anarchism.
It's because Biden did it. Sorry.
Always bad. Every
it's
4 years, morality changes.
Yeah, it flips. Maybe it's time we reach out to Stefan Molyneux and get him on the show and see, because he went nuts for Trump and then just got deplatformed from literally everything. I think he exists on locals.com and Odysee. That's it right now. Maybe I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you think it's time to reach out.
He's back on Twitter, but because of the Musk regime. But he said that he won't go back on until they apologize and explain why he was banned in the first place.
Oh, please. Okay.
So he hasn't tweeted. But yeah, his account's up there.
Interesting.
He got a ton of new followers because his name was trending for a little, and he's still depriving us of all of it.
Yes, Station in the comments says get him back. Maybe it's time. Maybe we reach out. All right. Well, let me look into that. No promises. He and I have a bit of a history, so I don't know if he'll be open to it, but we'll see. Let's see. Good to see you guys in the comments. If you have any questions for Keith, get them in now. Put question in all caps so that I see it as they go by. And you're welcome to ask whatever you'd like. Okay, let's do 2 more sort of excerpts from the book, and then we'll just tell people if you want to read the rest, go download it, okay? Because you got some good stuff in here. Spooner, Walter Block, Privatize the Roads. That's a good one. You have Hoppe, obviously. You have Roderick Long, Scott Horton, Shepard. Is that the Shepard I know, Shepard? I was a police officer, now I'm a voluntarist.
How many Shepherds do we know that were previously a police officer and now
That's awesome. Yes. I'm so glad you put him in this book. That's so cool. He might be on the show soon.
Yeah, so he wrote that specifically for this book. Another gentleman, Shane Hazel, wrote this entry specifically for this book, going from Marine to voluntarist. So we have people who really had their income coming from this apparatus, and this is their story of how they were humbled into saying, you know what, I came into this with the best of intentions. It wasn't what I thought, and I decided to change. And Shane Hazel, by the way, did a floor mopping with Stacey Abrams and the other guy in a gubernatorial debate. I believe it was for senator or governor in Georgia, and he made us all so proud. So guys like Shane Hazel, Shepard Oakley, those are the minds you want to get into when you're talking to people who are police officers or members of the military.
That's so cool. Shepard has a YouTube media channel too. He's on Odysee as well. Shepard the Voluntarist. Definitely go look him up. I have him on Disenthrall every chance I can think of an excuse to have him on. He's a great guy. Right now, we're engaging in sort of a behind the scenes intellectual debate about some of the finer points of libertarian theory in regards to abortion. And the man knows how to think and he knows how to debate. And it is truly a pleasure to be challenged by him. Definitely, I suggest go check him out. Has he been on the Anarchast? If not, we need to get him on. Note to self. Let's see. Okay, so here's the next one I haven't read. Robert Higgs, The State is Too Dangerous to Tolerate. Can you tell me about that one?
Yes, so Robert Higgs says, look, when we look at something like the free market and say, well, bad things could happen in the future if we embrace the free market system. We know this because in the past, a number of bad things have been done in the name of the free market or capitalism, whatever word you want to use. He says, the state, however, not only have bad things happened, we have every reason to continue they're going to continue to happen because of this moral double standard. So let me pull this up and get some specific quotes from this. Robert Higgs, unfortunately, doesn't put material out anymore. So he says, although I admit that the outcome in a stateless society will be bad because not only are people not angels, but many of them are irredeemably vicious in the extreme, I conjecture that the outcome in a society under a state will be worse, indeed much worse, because first, the most vicious people in society will tend to gain control of the state, and second, by virtue of this control over the state's powerful engines of death and destruction, they will wreak vastly more harm than they ever could have caused outside the state. So what he's referring to here is this concept that James Madison, I believe, said, if men were angels, we wouldn't need a state. Unfortunately, men are not angels, so a state is necessary. What Robert Higgs is saying is not getting into the argument of, well, actually, men really are angels. He says, I'll accept your entire premise and question the conclusion that you come to. He goes on, it is unfortunate that some individuals commit crimes, but it is stunningly worse when such criminally inclined individuals wield state powers. The lesson of the precautionary principle is plain. Because people are vile and corrupt, the state, which holds by far the greatest potential for harm and tends to be captured by the worst of the worst, is too risky for anyone to justify its continuation. To tolerate it is not simply to play with fire, but to chance the total destruction of the human race. This has actually come to fruition in discussions regarding the war in Donbass, or what is now the war in Ukraine, as of the last year or so. We have two nuclear powers. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, recently came to address the American Congress, and the American Congress is giving Ukraine everything they can to fight with the Russians. So it is a very destructive time. The president of Russia, Putin, came out and said to anyone who's thinking of using nuclear weapons in this war, let it be clear that those rose winds blow both ways. I mean, my God, it's like NATO first declared war in 2001 for the first time in its 52-year history. After September 11th, NATO declared what's called Article 5. And then they spent 20 years fighting the Taliban, and then the Taliban took over 11 days after they left. And from this, the deep state has said, yeah, now we might have to go to war with China, nuclear power, if they start calling the shots in Taiwan. Might also have to go to war with nuclear power Russia over Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimea and Kherson. So this is how psychotic these people are. And notice that the difference, it's not like, well, these people want Ukraine to live and be free, and we don't care if they die. The question is, who is the state going to answer to? Is it going to be an American puppet or a Russian puppet or someone more neutral? So it's not that the Council on Foreign Relations says this could be a chance to liberate Crimea. All they're advocating is Crimea be ruled by this guy called Zelensky, or Poroshenko, the previous guy, rather than this guy called Putin. That's what they're risking mass death for. It's not total freedom versus total slavery. It's not total life versus total mass death. It's literally which regime. And once you realize that, you go, oh, well, God, well, this is maybe worth $5 or $10. I'd vote for Ukraine to take back Crimea, but I would not risk one life, let alone tens of thousands of lives for something like this. So that is what Higgs says when the state is too dangerous to tolerate. We're starting a third world war for a ridiculous reason, almost as ridiculous as the First World War, which I didn't think could be topped, but the state continues to impress me.
Yeah, impress and awe. A couple of people, let's see, I got corrected in the comments. It isn't Shepard the Voluntarist. His channel name is called Shepard Thinks. I put a link in both chats directly to it, so you guys can go find him. He's awesome. Okay, we got a question. Oh, yeah, Larkin Rose is in here, guys. I mean, somebody said that their Bible is the most dangerous superstition. Pretty sure you got that in here, right? I would be shocked if you didn't.
Well, thanks for saying it before checking. Of course I have it in there. So, again, this is
if you didn't, you would have been shamed, like, by me in the audience, so
well, that's how we're going to keep people in line in the voluntary society.
That's right. Shame.
So that is another example where it's like, God, what would I recommend to people? Economics in one lesson. There's the law. There's no treason. There's the most dangerous superstition. There's Practical Anarchy by Stefan Molyneux. And I said, well, I'm just going to take my favorite quotes from that and put it in there. And so I have 2 pages of my favorite quotes from Larkin Rose. Larkin Rose is the most dangerous superstition, as well as a chapter titled The Power Vacuum Argument. So
Station just rang the shame bell in the chat. Sorry to interrupt. Go
ahead. So in the power vacuum argument, Larkin Rose differentiates things that inherently happen as a result of humans existing versus things that only happen because people hold certain erroneous ideas. And he says something like people having power will exist in every society, no matter what. Because the second you choose to do something, some people are better at it than others, and those people will have more power. However, it does not therefore follow that some people will always have a moral double standard within society, and we could never have simply the same standards for government that we would have for any other organization. You got to acquire people's time and money voluntarily if they're not aggressing against anyone else, or else it's illegitimate. So Larkin Rose gets to the center of what's so important is general public opinion being the way for us to achieve a voluntary society. Also, when it comes to things like, well, there's all these gangs and they have a lot of guns. Without a state, they would simply be the new government that's going around and coercing people. Larkin Rose beautifully articulates the fact that where do the gangs arise? The Smirnoff gang is not around today. It's just an organization. Yet alcohol gangs were very much a thing in the 20s in America. The main thing that changed is alcohol prohibition no longer exists. So bad as alcohol is, as many deaths as it causes, as many marriages and lives as it ruins, it's still better than having it be outlawed. So he explains that the states create black markets, which create gangs because people can't do voluntarily, or rather because people coercively do what they otherwise could do voluntarily. And of course, consumers suffer as a result of this. You're much more likely to get poison moonshine during Prohibition than you are likely to get poison in your alcohol today. Same thing with things spiked with fentanyl today. Much less likely to happen if there were stores that had reputations, and you wouldn't be doing this crystal meth, shooting it into your eye once your veins have run out. People would be taking things that are much more reasonable. Just like how with alcohol, not everyone's always chugging vodka, the most potent thing. People often do beer, which is like 4 or 5% alcohol. So it's not that, well, everyone will be on crystal meth forever. No, with alcohol, we don't have that. So Larkin Rose's contributions in here, I greatly appreciate.
IM asks, how do we get there from here? Counter economics, parallel societies, parallel systems? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, division of labor is vitally important. So the people that are good communicators, that are good authors, I think it's important for them to do that. And people who are good at 3D printing and operating in gray markets, I think they should certainly do that. The main thing that I think is going to help us compete with the state is simply by us individually having our own standards for who we delegate decision making to. So the state being the monopoly on possible arbitration within a geographical area. Once you start getting competitors, whether it's churches, families, voluntary virtue, or any other civil society, country clubs, Boys and Girls Club, Boy Scouts, YMCA, anytime you start delegating authority or decision making for settling any potential disputes, you are necessarily engaged in an act of rebellion. So this is a very peaceful way to do something where people simply don't look to the state as the answer. The more competitor, the more you operate with these people, the more money you give them, the more of your time, the more powerful they'll become as competitors to the state. I mean, the court system already is so clogged up with so much trivial nonsense, and they're so inefficient that private arbitration is constantly growing. That is the root of how we start to get out of this. Other organizations like Blue Dispatch are very good, where they will hire former cops. So the law enforcers of the politicians, they'll take them out of their job and get them into a voluntary security job. And they go, well, the thing is now that they're with us, these are a bunch of Blue Lives Matter people. However, I'm saying this is operating in the right direction. They'll say, yeah, they don't have the power to do off the clock what they can do on the clock, but they're there to break up fights, and they're there to, keep us safe. And just like how you would feel safe at a concert with private security, or at a mall with private security, or at a baseball game that has private security, we hire private security, and the people they hire are former cops. So you're taking people directly out of the coercive sector and entering them into the voluntary sector with organizations like Blue Dispatch. I certainly hope we see more of that as time goes on.
Strategic Tactic asks, is there an audiobook format available?
No, there is not, but I
know somebody that does those.
I know, yeah. Well, I legally have the copyright on this book, and I also have a chapter in here on why copyright is complete nonsense, along with all intellectual property, written by Isaac Morehouse. So you can start recording. Anyone who is listening can start recording their own clips, use their own tones, emphasize different things. And I've only recorded my chapters. I wrote the introduction. I wrote the afterword. Those are up on my YouTube, Odysee, Spotify, Apple, Libertarian Institute channels. But yeah, hey, anyone who wants to do it, please do.
All right. So the last one that I'd like to hear about, and it's a meta question. So the last chapter in the book, I guess, is Hans Hermann Hoppe, What Must Be Done, which kind of goes to the question that you were just talking to. What did he have to say about? I figured you put that last because it's maybe the call to action. I haven't read that, so I'm not familiar. But maybe you could talk about that. Like, what is his call to action, and why did you make that the closing chapter?
So this is an excerpt, and I'll read the introduction so you can see why I put it last. Strategy: stopping the statist disease. How can the state and the statist disease be stopped? Now I will come to my strategic considerations. First off, 3 fundamental insights or guiding principles must be recognized. First, that the protection of private property and of law, justice, and law enforcement is essential to any human society. That's important because when people hear we're against X, in this case the state, what they hear is we oppose one arbitrary element or one accidental element of the state. Sometimes that could be provision of roads, provision of schooling, provision of security. That is not what defines the state as a unique entity. As I mentioned earlier, football stadiums, malls, a lot of bars, a lot of clubs, all have private security. So the state doesn't necessarily have to provide security. But there is no reason whatsoever why this task must be taken on by one single agency, by a monopolist. The monopoly is important because we're always accused of, well, under the free market, there could potentially be a monopoly, and then they go and advocate a monopoly on security. And this is the way a state would operate because the state has a recognized right to make laws and arbitrate against people in ways that other people could never arbitrate against the state. So a cop does have the recognized right to tell you what to do, regardless of motivations, whereas if you tried doing that to them, you would literally be called a terrorist, someone trying to use violence for political reasons. Hoppe says, as a matter of fact, it is precisely the case that as soon as you have a monopolist taking on this task, he will, with necessity, destroy justice and render us defenseless against foreign as well as domestic invaders and aggressors. It is then one's ultimate goal, which one has to keep in mind, is the demonopolization of protection and justice. Protection, security, defense, law, order, and arbitration in conflicts can and must be supplied competitively. That is, entry into the field of being a judge must be free. He says that is the source of how we're going to realistically get out of this. And doing that has a very low buy-in because people constantly oppose monopoly in almost every other aspect of their life. If you said, I really like books and movies and computers, and you said, I think there should only be one book provider, and this way the book market's regulated, and there's no anarchy in the book market. They could just, check to make sure that only good things are put out, because if they're bad, that's sort of screwing over the customer, and that they're true. This way false stuff doesn't get spread out. Immediately what comes to mind is, well, what kind of tyrant is going to seek that job in the first place? How do they know what's true? They're fallible. They're a human just like me. And how do you know if it's a waste of my time? One man's junk is another man's treasure. So for all of those same problems that we wouldn't want a monopoly in the book industry or the television industry or in the soft drink industry, we should not want a monopoly in security. Therefore, people should start to seek competitors. What Murray Rothbard said is, one of the best ways to get people to start doing this on their own is to desanctify, demystify, and delegitimize the ruling elite that are currently holding up the status quo. So when you see a guy in a Trump hat waving while holding the podium of the Speaker of the House, you have to share that photo and laugh hysterically because that is demystifying and desanctifying the elite. Another way to do that is to just passively mention to people, don't you think this president has tons of dementia, first of all. Second of all, is not a very good speaker, is a murderer. The vice president is also a blatant idiot. The person who, the press secretary, is one of the least impressive humans you could think of. These are the people you think have the right to rule? It's bad enough if it was like, well, look, it's David Beckham and Mila Kunis rule all of America. It's like, well, they're awesome and great looking, and maybe they should rule us. It's like the scummest of the scum are occupying these offices, And people are still like, oh, yeah, that's someone I should probably worship. So by demystifying, delegitimizing, and sanctifying them, by showing blatant contradictions, or by just showing how unimpressive they are, we can move towards a system of competing arbitration, which would necessarily be the end of the concept of statism as we know it through a change in general public opinion.
All right, Keith, is there anything else that you'd like people to know about your book?
Yes. A wise man once told me that so many disagreements actually come down to a disagreement on definitions. Mm-hmm. So when people say, I'm against capitalism because not everything is about money, and I say, I agree, not everything is about money. Is that what makes the capitalist point of view unique? You know what seems pretty money obsessed? Socialists who say, give us your property that you voluntarily acquired, or we'll put you in a cage and shoot you if you resist our police. So what is it? Well, is it about, benefiting the masses? Well, then things like Amazon and Apple have benefited the masses more than any government program. So what the heck is this? So what I've done on page 3 is a section titled Terms, where I give the main things that I'm talking about in this book and give a clear and concise definition. So my communism definition is the abolition of private property as defined by Karl Marx, socialism being the institutionalized interference with or aggression against private property and private property claims, capitalism being a social system based on the explicit recognition of private property and non-aggressive contractual exchanges between private property owners. These might be the two most important pages in the book, pages 3 and 4, that just list the definitions. Stefan Kinsella actually helped me out with that section along with Bob Murphy to make sure we got the best definitions that we could come up with. So
I love the minds on those two. I love the minds on those two. They're great people.
And if you just want a summary, the book is 318 pages. Check out the free PDF. Read my 2-page introduction and my 2-page afterword. I try to summarize everything I've learned in those 4 pages. If you want the terms to just get an understanding of where the voluntarist mindset is coming from, check out pages 3 and 4, where I give a list of all the important terms that I will that do come up throughout the book. Again, it's essays as far back as 1850 with Frederick Bastiat, and as recent as 2021 by Shane Hazel, Clint Russell, Shepard Oakley, and Danny Duchamp in his excellent article, which is titled The Utilitarian Case for Voluntarism.
Awesome. I was going to wrap it up, but we got one more interesting question that I'm curious about where you are on. So I'm going to go ahead and ask this as the final question. IM asks, basically, where are you on the sort of black pill to white pill spectrum? How are you feeling doomed? Are you feeling hopeful? If so, either way, why? Do you see a way of moving towards a white pill? I guess is a good question. What are your thoughts on that?
I am very much white pilled. The more I read, I just got finished with the memoirs by Kaiser Wilhelm II, Kaiser of Germany from 1888 to 1918, I believe are the years. And oh my God, not just the Franco-Prussian War was just something so terrible. The First World War was so traumatic, set the stage for a Second World War. Tons of guys getting enslaved into the most ridiculous, justified military interventions that got so out of hand so quick. And of course, the politicians never apologize. So mass enslavement, mass murder, guys are getting completely blinded. Guys losing their limbs, stories of guys coming home trying to hold their kids, and the kids are so terrified they're screaming because half of daddy's face is blown off because one guy killed the head of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So Austria goes to war with Serbia, given a war guarantee, a blank check by Germany. So then Russia declares war on them. That's how simple something got. So something simple got so deadly and so complex. When you realize how bad past events really are, you take a look around today and go, yeah, things are bad, but oh my gosh, my limbs aren't getting blown off for some psycho war based on lies just yet. I mean, if we don't go to war because... did you see Zelensky the other day came out and said, Russia just bombed Poland, now NATO has to declare war against them. And then Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin came out and said, well, actually, it turns out the missile that hit Poland was actually a Ukrainian defense missile. But don't worry, because Russia's actually ultimately at fault because they went into Ukraine in the first place in February. So we can be very close to, something very bad happening. However, if something bad, if all the future holds is just terrible things, well, then what we should do is really appreciate every single second we have in the present with the people we love and embrace all the freedoms we currently do have. And if things are going to be good in the future, well, then don't worry and have a good time. So under both circumstances, I think we should be white-pilled. I mean, imagine I've heard estimates that there were 80 million people killed in the Second World War. This would be starting with Japan going into China in 1933, ending with Nagasaki in August of 45. 80 million people. It's like, dude, I hate seeing the videos of, look at Philadelphia and San Francisco, and it's a lot of homelessness and a lot of drugs and a lot of tragedy. And dude, I hate that, but let's not pretend that after these tens of millions of deaths, Stalin got half of Eastern Europe and all of Russia, and then they were going to fight proxy wars in Korea, another million dead. Vietnam, another 3 million dead, 1 million dead in Afghanistan between 79 and 89 when the Soviets went in there. There's so much mass death and terror in our past that looking at things right now, you could say, yeah, things are bad, but compared to what? Even the war in Afghanistan in the 70s and 80s was deadlier than the recent war in Afghanistan, and even the war in Iraq between Iraq and Iran when when my parents were growing up, that was more deadlier than the recent war in Iraq. And Russia going into Ukraine in the 30s was more deadlier than Russia going into Ukraine now in what's called the Holodomor. So I am white-pilled just because as sad as things can be, we still have great liberty voices that now have further reach than probably ever before. The tyrants have always been able to control public opinion since the days of the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, but today they face a little more competition. And because we have the moral and economic high ground, I think it's much better for us now than it has been in the past.
Certainly
but
more people can hear.
So
more people can, well, yeah, I mean, you're not wrong that the war death count has gone down. So in those terms, you're unequivocally right. And I think you're also right that more people can hear our voices than ever before, especially now that we're starting to break away from the monopoly on media that is, YouTube and the legacy news channels. So yeah, okay, that's good. Keith, thanks for coming on, and thanks for being one of the few that spends more time acting and thinking than complaining. It's good to know you. I appreciate you, man.
Anytime, Patrick. Greatly appreciate you having me on. The book is The Voluntarist Handbook. Check it out at libertarianinstitute.org. Free PDF. I appreciate being on Anarchast again.
Hell yeah. All right, guys. Remember, link in the description, both to the book you can buy on Amazon if you want to support him. There's also a link to the website with links to the free PDF downloads, all in the description on all of the channels that we're broadcasting on right now, I do believe. We have a lot of interviews coming up this month, more back-to-back in a month than I've ever done before, ever. Tomorrow we have Becca Tisgani. Thursday, I can't talk about that one yet. Friday, we have Danny Sessom.
Molyneux?
No, we're not that fast. Didn't reach out that fast. Andrew Kaufman on Sunday is going to be a spicy one, I have a feeling. Chad Schwartz Monday, Max Egan Tuesday, Carrie Madej Wednesday, Eileen McCusick Thursday, Jason Bassler the next week. Then we have an Acapulco, guys. So it's going to be a hell of a next month. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out in the comments. And I will see you next time. Peace, love,
peace,
and anarchy.